Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this Wednesday morning version of Coffee and Communication. We're going to go ahead and bring in our friends on Instagram because we have to do that separately. So, welcome to everybody there on Facebook, LinkedIn, uh, YouTube, and Instagram. Like I said, one of the things I wanted to just kind of share with you this morning is a quick discussion on, when do we decide that communication matters? That what we're getting ready to say or write or record, whatever it might be. And it's not always evident. It's not always simple to do. Sometimes it's very perfunctory. Someone's told something to do, and there's not really the space to think about it. To be completely honest, but that's not the case with most situations. And how do we make sure that we're headed in the right direction, what we're doing? Because not only is there the communication itself, but it's usually what we do before we take action, during action, and then figuring out what do we do next. Is it doing that assessment, which no one wants to do, of communication or their actions, or really much of anything. And so there's three areas that I generally approach when it comes to this question. And it can be helpful in communication, it can be helpful in action, and you can generalize it in different ways too. And this is really the first thing, is understanding what's driving the communication. What this usually means is who's the person directing it. If it's a work situation, who's the boss? If you're an employee, who's the person that's saying, go do this? If you're an entrepreneur or working with clients, who's that customer? And sometimes, it can be you. It can be other people as well. There can be other, players and individuals that have influence or are directing this to happen. But regardless of what that landscape might look like for you, who is that person? And this can really bring a lot of clarity to not only does that communication matter, but how to approach it, what matters in that communication. And it can not always be straightforward, especially for those of you who are in situations where you're an employee, where someone may be dictating something to be done from higher up the food line, the food chain, and might not be someone that you readily have access to. But it's important to still realize who that is, and also who's a representative of that person. Who are you working more directly with to get that done? And also, to get glimpses and understanding of why is it important? What happens if it doesn't? And there's actually a number of questions that I go through that you can use, you can share. Also, if you're in a leadership role, things that you can kind of preemptively answer, information that you can provide of what the expectations are when you're asking someone to create that communication, to work with people. And that can start removing a lot of that fear, uncertainty, and doubt about what's going on. Why are we doing this? What's the implications, positive and negative, for if something's done well or not done well? So really understanding who the person is behind that. If you're in a situation where you are the owner of a business, an entrepreneur, you're working with a customer, you have much more direct access to that person, because typically that's going to be the person either stroking the check that signed the contract, or someone directing someone else to do that is going to be that same person that you typically will have access to, or can get access to the person that they directed to do that. So you can have a little bit more freedom in accessing people to really do that kind of information gathering, to understand what is going on, why is this important, not only from a strictly business sense, but also to that individual that's having you do the communication, that's having you do the work. Second part of this is there a written desired outcome statement for this work? And we talk a lot about the desired outcomes for the organization or at a personal level, as far as very big picture stuff. But it's important to remember that every project essentially should have its own desired outcome, its own desired outcome statement. And this includes communication projects, because that's really the way to view when we're doing a communication activity, is that each of them is their own project. And is there the clarity? Is there a statement written that minimizes the chaos that could be affiliated with doing this work? And ask for it. hey, do we have a written statement? Do we have a desired outcome statement, a mission statement, whatever your organization calls this written statement? But ask for it. Do we have this written down? You could talk to someone, you get access to that person that made the decision to have you do the communication. Make your notes, take your notes, and then ask that person, but is there something that we have written that we can also use? Now, if there is, that's awesome. That's a great starting point. If there's not, that's also awesome, because you now have the opportunity to create one. And regardless of whichever situation you find yourself in, is if it exists, you can go ahead and look at the information you've collected and edit what that is to more accurately reflect the conversations that you've had. And if something doesn't exist, it gives you an opportunity to really provide value by creating one yourself and sharing it with those people, whether it's the communication sponsor, who's the person that decided that communication to happen, whether it's a boss or a customer or someone like that. But you can show, you can also, are able to assimilate and use that information to help provide direction, and also get consensus on what does that outcome need to be, which a lot of people will skip these steps. They'll just say, oh, go do a presentation, write a memo, whatever it is on the situation, without fully thinking through of what you want to have. And when you're in a situation where you create that desired outcome statement, it's saving them time and putting them really in a review and edit mode instead of a creation mode. Again, providing more value, providing more service for that person. So that's the second part. You want to know who this is important to. Is there clarity? Is there a written statement? If not, how you can create one. If there is, how you can edit it and get agreement on what needs to be done. And a big part of that is always who's the audience that can help you achieve that desired outcome. The last part is understanding the risk and benefit of doing the communication. If you're in a situation where you're an employee, where you're being directed to it, it's still worth doing, because it's good to understand what those benefits and risks are, because they could help you recognize future opportunities, but also risks that could land in your lap if things don't go right, and give you an opportunity to maybe make some edits and some corrections before the communication happens, or to be prepared for contingencies of things that could go wrong, and also things that can go right. So you walk through an analysis of, there's a spectrum that I'll use in this, whereas one side is like, is it something that should be done? Yes. Your odds of success, yes, it is 100%. The other end of that spectrum is no. And then in between, you kind of got, we got like an 80% chance of making this happen. Okay, so probably we should do it. We probably have access to the resources, the people, the budget, stuff like that. And then at the opposite end, you got no, don't do this. And then slightly to the right, towards the middle of that spectrum, probably looking at like maybe a 20% chance of success. And then you kind of really have to sit back and okay, we don't have the budget. Maybe we have this piece, not that piece. And then the middle is usually kind of a toss-up. We don't know what the hell we're going to do. We don't know how it's going to turn out. And this is where really experience and wisdom will come into the play of making that go, no-go decision. Now, if it's a direction that you've received from someone else, that kind of removes that decision-making process. But you're aware of what the risks are and what the potential benefits are. If you are in a different position where you have the authority or the freedom of action to decide to do something or not, or to provide additional counsel or advice, it provides that additional layer that you can go to whoever you're working for, or your customer, or whoever that person is, and be like, this is, some things we need to be aware of. These are things that could turn out really good if we have these things, and then, make an appropriate decision. What's the likelihood that if it blows up on you, that you get saddled with the blame? What's the likelihood that if it does awesome, that you get credit or you get left in the shadows? These are different aspects to keep in mind. And sometimes the answer is no. Not every communication needs to be done. And if you have the ability to make that decision, which we all ultimately do, it depends on what the consequences are we want to deal with. Is it better not to do something for whatever you assess the reason not to do it, and then walk or leave the situation or risk whatever the fallout could be. Sometimes that's the best bad answer. It's not ideal, but also most of the time it gives us an opportunity to adjust, because people want success. And how do you shepherd people into that position, especially as someone who is providing services for someone who is providing advice? And it's important to keep this in context of, is that person or group going to appreciate that work? And if that's not the case, that could be a misalignment of priorities and really what's important, what needs to be done. So these are just some things to keep in mind, because it can be challenging sometimes. The time can be a factor. Competing interests can be a factor, but not every communication is equal. Not everyone matters. Not all of them should be done. And this applies the same as for our actions. Not every action is equal. Not every action should be done. And ultimately, it comes down to each of us: do we do this or not? And most of us are not in a situation where we're compelled to do something, such as if you're in the military or something like that, where you don't have a whole lot of choice on what you're going to do. So it's something to keep in mind as far as when you move forward, when you're doing stuff, really with the ultimate goal of how do you make it better? How do you do a better job? And also, how do you start detecting that this may not be, very advantageous for you, and there's other considerations, to take into mind. So kind of something to keep in mind when you're moving forward with other things. This is a midpoint of the week, so hopefully you've got some stuff under your belt. You can moving forward. Always keep in mind that what we're doing, how do we make an impact? What do we do? If something's worth doing, it's worth doing well. I'm a big believer into how you do anything is how you do everything. So strive for that consistency in being good and excellent at what you do, not average. If you've read any of my other work or seen my other videos, average is bad. So be good, be great, be excellent, and kind of keep this check down list. This is also going to be on my other sites: Veteran Communication Coach, Business Communication Coach, with some those questions that I typically ask and more, if you're curious for more information on this. But enjoy your beverage and have a great Wednesday, and I'll talk to you later.